Last Saturday, Israel's Prime Minister Naftali Bennett met for 3 hours with Vladimir Putin in Russia. As of the time I record this message, Mr. Bennett is the only world leader to do so since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Regardless of the small odds that this meeting and the subsequent phone calls between the two leaders will help to end the conflict, Bennett was praised by many who just a week before harshly criticized him. The source of the criticism was Israel's refusal of the United States' request to co-sponsor a UN Security Council resolution condemning the Russian invasion. Even though a short time later Israel voted in favor of a UN General Assembly resolution condemning Russia, the perception around the world, as well as in Israel, was that Israel chose not to fully stand with America and the West against Russia. Even staunch Israel supporters like Senator Lindsey Graham, as well as many others in Israel and around the world, most especially Volodymyr Zelensky, the only other Jewish head of state in the world, expressed disappointment with her stand. We know that the Israeli leaders are not cold-hearted people, and they will not risk the rage of the US unless they have a very good reason. So what is it? Russia is on Israel's northern border. Let me explain. Since the beginning of the civil war in Syria, Israel frequently fires on targets inside Syria that threaten her security. Most of these targets are connected to Iran. The main objectives are 1. Preventing Iran from building a proxy army in Syria, as she did in places like Lebanon, Iraq, and Yemen. Israel cannot afford having another Iranian-sponsored military group so close to her border. 2. Preventing weapons from being delivered from Iran to Hezbollah in Lebanon. Israel carried these missions with little resistance from the crumbling Syrian army. But in September 2015, Syria invited Russia to help the Assad regime to regain control of the country. The Russians didn't just provide them with weapons and training, but sent a whole army, soldiers, airplanes, battleships. Israel is a regional power, but stands no chance against the second strongest army in the world. And now when Russia controls Syria's airspace, Israel has a big problem. But to Israel's delight, the Russians allowed her air force to attack its target, especially since the Russians were not happy with the Iranian presence in Syria, and Israel essentially did their bidding. Israel and Russia developed a routine. Before an Israeli attack, the IDF coordinated with the Russian forces in Syria, preventing a conflict between the two armies. In addition, so far the Russians denied the Syrians access to their very effective anti-aircraft system, S-300, that they brought to Syria. If activated by the Syrians, that can make the life of the Israeli pilots quite miserable. I personally wish Israel, despite the complicated situation in Syria, had stood firmly with the United States from the beginning, even for the reason that the US has been Israel's biggest supporter, financially, militarily, and politically, and when the US asks Israel to stand with her, Israel must do so. Furthermore, such a stance is also a moral and justified stand to take at this time. See you next week.